Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is PJ. Today I am starting a new series and it's all about the Enneagram. Enneagram is a very powerful tool for self-discovery, for self-realization, for spirituality, for all the things that help us become more aware of ourselves. It's a powerful tool that is not to be taken lightly. It could completely transform your life in the best way possible. And I know it certainly has done that for me. And that's why I became so passionate about wanting to talk about the Enneagram, share about the Enneagram, and maybe bring some awareness and some light to this topic because I know that it can change your life without a doubt. So, what is the Enneagram and why is it important for us to know about it and how can it help us? Why should you care to learn this? Because you already might be on a spiritual path, you already might be into different types and modalities of tools that help you get a better understanding of yourself, of your patterns, of your habits, and so on and so forth. Why the Enneagram? Why should we care? So, today I'm here to answer those questions, and I really want us to go on a journey together. This is not something where it starts here and it ends with the Enneagram. Enneagram is just a starting point for our journey, and I'm intending to continue this journey into deeper and deeper and deeper levels of self-realization and self-awareness and spirituality ultimately. So the Enneagram is basically a nine-pointed shape. And this nine-pointed shape is basically talking about nine distinct personality types. These personality types are consisting of nine different patterns that we act out as we go through our lives, as we go throughout our day, because a lot of times as a child, I'm not saying our patterns and our type got shaped in childhood, but a lot of times our childhood and what happened to us, whether it was within our family, whether it was within our society, or whatever other setting it might have been that we grew up in childhood, whatever the circumstances were, as a little child, a lot of times all of us, we thought about different ways and thought about possible patterns that we can play out in order to get our needs met. So, whatever the circumstances might have been, there were nine primary different types of ways that we might have acted out in order to get our needs met, our primary wants and desires met as a child. And a lot of times, what happens is we grow up, we go into adulthood, and we still are acting out of our childhood wounds and childhood desires and patterns, really. It will be akin to wearing shoes that you have outgrown. It's like wearing the pair of shoes that you had when you were 12. If you're 36, those shoes are, they need to be discarded. Those patterns need to be let go of in order for us to become a new creation, but a more true version of ourselves, really. A lot of times these patterns, it's almost like the light of being within us, our spirit, it's covered up with dust. It's covered up um, with tar. And what we need to do is bring the light of awareness on that tar, on that dust, and clear the screen, which is, what is the way I see it, and this is completely, my way of understanding it. It's like there's a light of being, you can call that spirit, within us. And the spirit is pure and it's still as it was created by the creator, by God. And a lot of times what happens is that our personality and our patterns get in the way of that light shining brightly through us and into the world. And that light, the way we can make it shine brighter is not by turning up its power. It's not like a dimmer where you turn it up and the light becomes brighter. The light is already bright, but there are stuff covering it. And our job with the Enneagram, with spirituality, with different modalities like meditation and so on and so forth, is to clear the screen so that light of our being can shine brightly out into the world. So what I was saying earlier about how we might have been outgrowing these patterns, but they're still with us. The Enneagram helps identify nine different primary patterns that most human beings act out to get their needs met when they are a child. And these patterns, there are the nine types of the Enneagram, and it goes a lot deeper after the first primary nine types. But the whole goal is not to discover the pattern or to discover the type and then get stuck there. So our job is to find our type, but then once we found our type, the type is trying to help us see certain blind spots that before we were blind to because there were blind spots. So as we become aware of our pattern, as we become aware of our type, now that type, that understanding, that realization of that type is going to help see it's going to help us see ourselves more clearly as we go through every day. As we go through our life, there's going to be situations that trigger us, that piss us off, that make us angry, make us want to react out of our programming, out of our pattern. And the whole goal of Enneagram is to bring awareness to the patterns so that we can bring conscious choice into our actions and into our reactions and into our responses. Because as long as you're acting out of your pattern, out of your personality programming, you are a slave to that personality programming. You might think you have conscious choice, but as long as you are just playing the pattern, you are very predictable. You know, it's like when you say, when this situation happens, when somebody brings up this topic, I always get angry, I always act out in this way. I either shut off, or I get reactive and become angry, or I, become passive aggressive. Whatever your reaction might be to this specific type of situation, well, that's very predictable. It's like we are still a slave to that programming because that programming has a tight grip on us, and it's like, you don't have conscious choice. Every time someone does this, you react the same way. You are a slave to this pattern. And our job with the Enneagram is to free ourselves from those patterns. Because I truly believe, as humanity, as a human race right now, what we are being forced to is an awakening from patterns and programming into conscious choice, into sovereignty, into freedom. Right now, I believe it's almost like the collective consciousness of humanity is rising and we are evolving. And just like it happens every time, as a society, as a collective is evolving, you either choose to evolve or you die. And I'm not saying that in a physical sense you're gonna die, but right now the light in the world is, it might not seem like that, but the light of consciousness in the world is constantly rising and rising and rising, and there's an evolution of consciousness happening. And with this light being so bright, if we don't choose to evolve with it, if we're still trapped and a slave to our patterns, it would be akin to dying. When the world is evolving, it would be akin to dying, but dying a spiritual death, or dying an emotional death. It's like life is trying to get us to experience more and more and more the light of our spirit. And the light of our spirit is our spirit. When we tap into it, when we go to the kingdom of heaven within us, the more we can walk through life, we can walk in life with a state of peace, with a state of joy, with a state of fulfillment, with a state of true satisfaction of our deepest desires, but not in a materialistic sense, in a state of joy that passes understanding. And with the Enneagram, we can truly reach that place by removing the obstacles in the way of us actually and naturally feeling that. Because it's our natural inheritance to be happy, to be joyful. You look at kids, you look at children, they're playful, they're happy, they're excited, until life slowly starts adding more and more and more patterns and more tar and more blemishes on their light, on the screen of their being, and their light is blocked, so they're forgetting how joyful they're truly meant to be and meant to live. So with Enneagram, the 9 personality types, I'm gonna just say their names real quick, and then later in future videos I'm gonna go much more in depth into each type. But there's already so much good information out there on the internet. A website called the Enneagram Institute is a phenomenal website for you to kind of read more in-depth descriptions of all the types. But my goal is, and there are a lot of amazing books as well, but my goal with this series is not to go super in-depth into the type descriptions, because I think that's something that's very common and overdone in the Enneagram circle, so to speak. And I'm actually starting to think that that becomes a bigger hindrance rather than something that helps us, because a lot of people become aware of their type, and instead of we're doing the work of outgrowing their type or manifesting the highest level of their type, which still I feel like is not the highest level that we can achieve with the Enneagram. But what happens, the biggest trap, is that a lot of people become aware of their type and then they get stuck in their type and actually become more identified with their type instead of identifying the type and then seeing, oh, there's a trap right there. That's my personality pattern's trap. Let me get out of it. They become more enamored with the type. Like, oh, I can't make decisions well because I'm a 9. Or, oh, I always, get aggressive because I'm an 8. Well, are you becoming more free? And that's a good measurement. I always ask yourself, is this tool helping me become more free, feeling more freedom, feeling like I am above my patterns? I'm not reactive, I am responding. I am not unconscious, I am conscious. And if it's not helping you get to those states, more conscious, more responsive instead of reacting, if it's not doing that, then it's actually hindering you, not elevating you. And our goal with the Enneagram is to identify the type and then realize its potential pitfalls and downsides, and then grow out of it. By shining the light of awareness on that pattern, we can see it in action when it starts to arise in us. So if you go into a situation and we clearly see, oh my God, my type is about to come out right now. I can see how my desire to be, in my type 9 personality type and don't speak my opinion because it might rock the boat too much. I can see how that's starting to want to come up and take charge because it's comfortable when it takes charge. It's used to that pattern's behavior and the consequences of that behavior. It's comfortable. It's known. It's unfamiliar to start acting differently, to start choosing differently, to start being a new person that you're not used to being. It's uncomfortable, but growth is uncomfortable. A butterfly becoming a butterfly, that's uncomfortable, but it's worth it. And that's the whole goal of the Enneagram. Like, it's worth it for us to do the work of shining the light of awareness so brightly on those patterns and saying, no more. Those patterns maybe served me in childhood, but they're not serving me anymore. I'm a free being. I'm a sovereign being, and I'm going to outgrow these. These patterns are not me. I am way beyond these patterns. I am not a slave to my personality patterns. So, real quick, the 9 types are: type 1 is called the reformer or the perfectionist. So this is a person that's very concerned with ethics, what's good, what's bad, right or wrong. It's very black and white thinking. Um, and I've heard that a good example of this person is, if you have ever read the book To Kill a Mockingbird, the main person in that book, I think his last name is Scott in the story. That person is like a type 1. They're very focused with justice and the right thing being done. So that's the type 1. The type 2 is called the helper or the giver. And as the name implies, it's a person that really seeks to give, to help other people. And a lot of these types, every type, when you hear it, so the helper, for example, the giver, helping people, giving to people, does that sound bad? No. But with everything, it has its downside. So none of these types are free of downsides. So even if the description that I'm giving right now very briefly, which is not in depth whatsoever, even though it sounds amazing, but there are downsides. So for example, if you're always giving and helping other people, but you're never becoming aware of your own needs and asking for your needs, then over time, there's an unequal measure of exchange. You're giving more than you're being given to and more than you're receiving. So therefore, what happens for a lot of people is that a lot of type 2s, for example, they might say they're giving out of true generosity, out of not having any expectations for return. But deep down, there is that expectation for a return. And it's natural to have that, as humans, like, it's natural. But when we deny that we have that expectation to gain something in return, and we say, hey, I'm just giving, I'm being a giver, a good person, a generous person, but over time, when we're not getting that equal measure of exchange, we become resentful. And so, just like I was saying, as much as it might sound good when you first hear it, it has its downsides, and that's the whole goal of the Enneagram. Enneagram is so balanced. It's like perfect yin and yang. It has the positives, has the negatives, and together that's what makes the whole image. So type 3s are called achievers or the performers, and these are the people that are very focused on achieving success, especially as the West defines it. Or honestly, like I feel like a type 3 is not just success in Western terms, but whatever society or micro society they're in. So, for example, if they're in a really religious society or family structure, success in that structure might look different. And this is a person who in childhood might have been told, you are only as good as you achieve. So the more you achieve, the more you are good, the more you're worthy of praise and love. And, they might have had parents that didn't say, well done, or you're awesome, unless that person actually accomplished and achieved and got whatever the measure of success in that family structure might have been. So the type 4 is called the tragic romantic, it's called the individualist, and these are the emotional deep divers of the Enneagram. They're so insightful when it comes to the realm of the emotions. They dive deeply into their emotions. And the pitfall here might be that they get too wrapped up with their emotions and they don't have enough, so to speak, stoicism to see the emotion for what it is, a passing state. And emotions can have beautiful, deep, profound messages to teach us. But again, emotions can also own us if we're not owning our emotions. So again, the work here for type 4s is not to get stuck in the pattern, become aware of it, see what they do, and then step out of it, become more conscious, and exercise more choice now in their day-to-day life as a result of becoming more aware of their type 4 personality habits. So type 5 is called the thinker or the investigator. No other name right now comes to my mind. So the type 5s are the intellectual deep divers. So if the type 4s were the emotional deep divers, the type 5s are the intellectual deep divers. So what I mean by that is when they love absorbing more and more and more knowledge. I think like if Google was a personality type, it would have been a type 5. It's like they love having access to a lot of information. And also if they get really obsessed with a topic, so for example, let's say like a type 5 individual gets very excited about astronomy. They want to learn everything about astronomy. They might bury themselves, so to speak, in books and in research and in YouTube. And I honestly feel like there has not been any better time in human history to be a type 5, I feel like, because I feel a lot of type 5 in myself. I'm type 9 primarily, but the ability to do research so easily is just so fun and so, I'm sure, riveting for type 5s. So great time to be alive for type 5s for sure. Type 6 are called the loyalist or the skeptic, and these are the people who are very loyal, as the name implies. They're really good, loyal team players. Like if they're part of the team, they're hardworking, they're loyal, they're dedicated. But the downside here is that they're very anxious. So the underlying motivation for a lot of their actions is fear. They feel this deep, deep fear internally. And in childhood, a lot of times there might have been a very unstable situation in the household. So, this is just a common story. It doesn't mean that it definitely is the case in every situation. But for example, somebody might have had an alcoholic dad, and that alcoholic dad created a lot of instability and an unstable situation for that child. And that child realized that they always have to be in a state of fear and anxiety in order to expect and anticipate problems and then adjust their behavior accordingly to that. And so the type 6 individual might have had that internal drive to be motivated by fear, and then that translated into their adulthood and all their doings later on. So again, in future videos we'll go deeper into what would be the best ways for all of the types to elevate above the types grip on them. So type 7s are called the enthusiasts or the adventurers. They're kind of like the Peter Pan of the Enneagram. Basically what that means is that they're so fun-loving, pleasure-seeking, playful, spontaneous, and as you can imagine, a lot of times becoming an adult, so to speak, is you are exercising more of an ability to be committed, to finish projects, to carry forward with long-term goals. And type 7s are so, uh, they love the excitement of new things. So a lot of times they might be not focused enough to finish certain projects to the end. And there are more things to speak on, but those are for future videos, and I'll dive more deeply into that, into the type descriptions. But yeah, just for now, the reason I said the Peter Pan of the Enneagram is because they are like the child that didn't grow up. But this is not to be offensive. This is the Enneagram. What I love about the Enneagram is that it can be so politically incorrect in terms of like it'll hurt your feelings. It's not going to beat around the bush. Enneagram reads you. Enneagram is, I remember, like, if you have ever seen the movie The Truman Show, where Truman, basically his whole life is being monitored. There are cameras everywhere. He doesn't know it, but people are watching him. Millions of people are watching him every day as he goes throughout his life. When I first learned the Enneagram, I literally felt like someone had been following me with a camera, and even inside my head, like it was almost like they read my mind. They knew how I'm going to think, how I'm going to respond. And I felt like an open book. Like there was nowhere to hide. And that's why I became so enamored by the Enneagram, and I wanted to learn more about it and about myself, because I was like, this collection of knowledge, because that's what the Enneagram is. It's spiritually based, it's psychology, it's many people of different religions, different cultures, combining their knowledge throughout history to come to what we call now the Enneagram system and framework. But it's basically people observing other people's patterns throughout history, observing their own patterns, and then coming together and realizing that certain patterns keep repeating, and therefore by having these repeatable patterns, they were able to put them in these 9 basic types. And so what I was saying is like the Peter Pan type 7 is basically a child that didn't grow up. What I was saying about the Truman Show, when I first learned the Enneagram, it was almost like I felt like people were following me. They knew every move that I made, and because it was so in depth and accurate and didn't beat around the bush. The reason I say it's politically incorrect is because it doesn't care if your feelings are going to get hurt based on what it says. It reads you. It knows that it's true. And as long as you don't have the truth, you are not able to free yourself. If you can't see yourself clearly without blind spots, then you're not going to be able to do the work to rise above it. So the Enneagram is very powerful. The type 8 of the Enneagram is called the Challenger, or the Challenger is good. I think that's the most common name that people use for type 8. The Challengers are very strong individuals. They're very dominant. They're very, it's like my way or the highway kind of beings, and their presence is felt. So when they walk into a room, you'll know a type 8 is there, and they, no matter, like, let's say their size or height or whatever, they're just gonna have a big presence. And I'm sure we've all met people like that when they walk in a room, you're like, I don't know who that person is, but that person is powerful. There's something about them. And the type 8s, when they learn to harness their power, their internal power, they can become massive transformational agents in the world. So, and when they don't, they can become very dictatorial. Very control oriented. They want control over others, and just like any type, could be healthy, could be unhealthy, and we're going to talk a lot more about those in future videos. The type 9s are called the peacemakers or the mediators, and that's personally my type, and it's like the best type of the Enneagram. I'm just kidding. But um, that's a tendency that a lot of us fall into when we first find our type. The ego wants to say, my type is the best type because it's my type. But really, there is no best type. All the types are equal. And the peacemakers are the ones that see, they do their best to see equality in all perspectives. And so often, one of their tendencies is that they know the perspective of everybody else, but they don't know their own perspective. So if you ask a type 9, what do you think about this? Like they can say, well, I know John thinks this, I know Kyle thinks this, I know Sammy thinks this, but if you ask them, what do you think, they might have no clue. And so the work for type 9 is actually to become more aware of their own preferences and their own desires and opinions and viewpoints, because they haven't done enough work on themselves to realize their opinion matters. And it's their job to figure out what that is. And the type 9 tendency, another one, is they go along with the flow too much. It's like along with the flow is a phenomenal quality and ability to have, but when you go along to get along, you don't at all impose your way in any shape or form. What's going to end up happening if you keep going like that, and certainly happened for me, is you'll look back and you feel like you didn't live your life for yourself. It was almost like your life was lived based on what other people wanted your life to be, and ultimately that's just a very, in my perspective, it's an unpleasant reality to have to face. But the sooner you face it, the better it is. So why should you care about the Enneagram? So the Enneagram, as I just explained, is a personality typing system that can read you. It's like when you read that type description for the first time, the one that is your type, you're going to be amazed at how could it have possibly known that much about you without having met you. Well, it has met you, because you think that you are the only person that's like you, but there are a lot of other people that are like you and have the same responses and reactions to life. So the reason I think we should all care about the Enneagram is because if you are interested in ultimately freeing yourself from your personality's patterns, ultimately become a person that is not reactive but responsive, a person that when they look back at their life, they can say, I lived that life. I was conscious, I was awake as I went through that life, and the choices I made those choices. I was not at all consumed and distracted and bogged down by my personality. I was awake. I'm consciously made the choices that in my heart, in my mind, in my body, I felt were right. And ultimately, you can say you lived a free life, because a life that is burdened by your personality's entrapments is not a life that was lived freely. And for me, my goal, the reason I even wanted to do this, is because for me, it's very important for us to live free, sovereign lives. I think we truly, as a human society, I think we're being shoved into and pushed into a new reality, the new normal that they call it. Even though on the surface, it seems like things are chaotic, I truly believe that it's like the destruction or the pruning that's like falling away of things that are not serving us and are not enabling us to be the freest, most sovereign versions of ourselves, and we're becoming more and more and more sovereign and free and conscious. It's truly waking us up. And it began with the quarantines, where a lot of times we get so wrapped up into our day-to-day lives, and we don't take enough of a time to take a step back and see our own behaviors, become conscious of what we're doing. And when we're so wrapped up, when we're lost, we are not. Consciousness requires a witness perspective. It requires us to take a stand back and watch, instead of getting lost into the Maya or the illusion of life and the occurrences that are happening. So like for example, with the whole COVID-19 thing, like when COVID hit and we went into quarantine, the world shut down for a while. it was almost like we were all forced to look at certain realities about our own lives that we have been denying or not looking at or turning a blind eye to. And it was a beginning of a massive awakening for a lot of people, including myself in a lot of ways. So I think that we're being shoved into a new way of being. And the new way of being requires us to be conscious, be awake, make choices that are in alignment with our highest values and not react. Because right now it's the easiest time to be a slave to our reaction. There's so much stuff going on that if we are not awake, that we are not completely here and conscious, we're going to fall into that trap of reacting. Everywhere you look, there's something to be angry about. Everywhere you look, there's something somebody's saying that makes you want to attack them. But as long as we are giving power to that, as long as we can't control our reactions, we are a slave to our reactions and our impulses. And so my whole goal with this whole channel and then wanting to teach the Enneagram on here on YouTube is to bring more consciousness and therefore more freedom into our life. So that's why you should care, because it can free you. I know it has certainly done so for me, and by no means is Enneagram the end of the journey. Enneagram is just the beginning of the journey. And it's interesting because I had already been on a spiritual path before I became introduced to Enneagram. But looking back, I'm like, man, I was able to deceive myself for a long time thinking I am spiritual, when in reality it was my ego taking a hold of spiritual concepts and saying I'm spiritual because I know these things, but I was still in my personality's patterns. And I'm not saying like I'm free of my personality's patterns, but at least I am aware of how my type 9 tendencies can take a hold of certain spiritual topics and make myself feel enlightened or woke. But in reality, I'm still just as much of a slave to my ego as I was before I even started a spiritual journey. So it can truly be a great starting point for any spiritual journey. Like I said, it's not the end, but you start the Enneagram journey, become aware of your ego's tendencies, and then from there you can jump on a spiritual path that speaks to you. And I can definitely make suggestions in future videos, certain different spiritual paths that I immersed myself in for a while, and that I ultimately stumble upon my path, which is the Course in Miracles. But again, choosing a spiritual path is completely a personal matter, and you just have to go with what deep down in your heart you feel like is the right path for you, and you can only figure that out after you experiment with many different paths. So next point I wanted to touch on in this video is, how can the Enneagram help you? Like I said, why should you care? Because it can free you. How can it help you? It can help you bring more awareness. A lot of us might observe ourselves. Like when you start meditating, for example, you sit there, close your eyes, you take a deep breath. Let's do it right now. As you sit here and as you do that, you become conscious of certain thoughts, certain emotions, certain bodily feelings that are just coming, passing, so to speak. The whole goal of meditation is to get into the witness stance, observe, not get lost in what the thoughts are, but observe them passing like there are clouds in the sky. So the Enneagram helps you realize that there are certain clouds, passing thoughts, passing patterns that you tend to give more attention to more often than not. There are certain ways that you tend to react more often than not. And having access to this map, you can look at this map or you look at your GPS and you're like, okay, I can see the map now. I can see what the road looks like, instead of like stumbling and falling and going to dead ends because you don't have a map. If you had a map and the map showed you, okay, if you want to get from here to here, if you want to get from completely being asleep to waking up, well, the journey for you in your type, because the Enneagram meets you where you are, and then from where you are, it helps take you where ultimately you want to go, which is waking up and becoming more conscious and aware in your life. So it meets you where you are, it gives you a map of where you are, and then helps you identify certain stumbling blocks for you, certain roadblocks that get in your way often. And by identifying those for you, due to so many people also being stuck in that same pattern, it helps you become more conscious and become more aware when that pattern shows up and starts trying to take control like it always does. You know, if it was like without the Enneagram, you might have to spend a lot of time and then mess up time after time, get into a relationship, then get into another relationship, and go through all this trouble to see this pattern underlying all the issues that kept coming up in the different relationships that you went into. It's like, one of my favorite teachers, spiritual teachers online, his name is Phil Good. He always says your lessons have a tracking device on you. So that means, let's say there's a lesson, there's a pattern that keeps coming back up for you because the universe is trying to get you to see this pattern and then free yourself from this pattern. You say, oh, this pattern is coming up because I live in the city. If I were to live somewhere else, this pattern would go away. Lo and behold, you move to that new city and that pattern is still there. So that lesson had a tracking device on you. It's like a missile that has a tracking device. It'll go where you're going until you face it and you deal with it. And the Enneagram, by giving you that map, it helps you see what lessons have tracking devices on you. So before you waste so much time, run into so much pain and hurt and trouble to learn and become aware of these patterns, it'll say, hey, these are your patterns. Let's focus on them now, instead of saying, let me just keep on trying, keep on trying, keep on trying. And as I said earlier, my spiritual path, my main spiritual path is the Course in Miracles. And the Course in Miracles always talks about this, the whole goal of the spiritual path that the Course suggests and puts forth is to save time, because saving time matters right now. We live in a time-space reality right now, and so, and that's a whole different topic. Our true reality is timelessness, but in the illusion, in the Maya, we live in time-space reality. So saving time does matter. So let's say if you don't get exposed to the Enneagram, and if you just keep trying to figure things out on your own, it might take you from 20 years to learn certain things. But with Enneagram, you can save time. So how good would it be to learn certain lessons in 1 year, in 2 year, in 3 year versus 45 years? Life matters. Our time matters here spent on earth. And to maximize it, I think the Enneagram can really, really help us and help you and help me maximize our time here by not having to learn certain lessons the super hard way and learn them quicker than before life tries to force us and make us learn them. So the next point I wanted to mention is, what are the steps on your Enneagram journey? So I think that the first step is for me, I think it's good to start your journey by reading all the type descriptions. And hopefully you start a meditation practice or you start just an observation practice. I highly recommend meditation, but meditation can only be as powerful as how much of that meditation practice translates into your day-to-day life. Because for a long time I used to meditate in the morning and then completely get lost into the occurrences of the day when I would go throughout the day. And I realized over time, I've been meditating for a while now, I realized the meditation, the 20 minutes in the morning, it's so much better than not having that at all. But when you lose connection to your breath as you go throughout the day and you get completely lost in the day, your meditation practice is not doing what it's trying to get you to do, which is become more conscious, not just when you're on the couch, when you're sitting down on your cushion and meditating, but as you go throughout your day and throughout your life. So, the first step is to, I think, if you're starting the Enneagram journey, learn more about the types, read the types. If you want, you can even take a test on the Enneagram Institute website. There are many other tests, but I found that one to be the most accurate one. It is not free, it's $12, but it's phenomenal. I think it's a great first starting point if you want to take a test and learn more about your type. But I think more powerful than that is to read all the type descriptions. Enneagram Institute, again, is a great website to go read those, or books that you find about the Enneagram that catch your eye. You can learn about the descriptions, and then once you learn about the descriptions, start observing yourself. And now you can have a roadmap as to what to try to look out for. It's like if somebody was like, all right, just observe the room you're in. And then you open your eyes and they were like, okay, how many green things did you see? You'd be like, well, I wasn't trying to focus on the green things. And then now they say, okay, well, look closely at the room you're in and pay attention to how many green items are in the room. And by knowing what to pay attention to, you become better at identifying how many green objects are in the room. So in the Enneagram case, for example, I would suggest, like, for the next 9 days, read one type a day. Okay, read type 2's description. You read type 2's description, and then you go and watch yourself as you go throughout your day. Observe, okay, so this person, asked me, their car battery was dead, and they asked me to give them a jump. But really, I was like I was in a rush to get somewhere for a very big meeting, but I didn't have the ability to say no. Okay, so I ended up giving them help, self-sacrificing, martyring myself when I knew it's not what's the best action to take, but I helped. I was a helper. So become aware of that. Don't judge it. Don't say like, oh, that was awful. I'm awful. No, don't get self-deprecating like that. And it's a trap that we all fall into. I know for me, like when I became aware of the laziness or sloth being the passion of 9, I was like, man, so I'm being such a sloth right now. I'm being so lazy right now, or whatever. And I was like, man, like you're becoming more enslaved versus free, because I was not using the Enneagram non-judgmentally on myself. I was starting to use it as a tool to condemn myself. And that might be my type 1 wing right there. So anyways, but the whole point, what I was saying is, read the type description today, and then observe yourself. Observe yourself as you go throughout the day. See what patterns come up. That observation, my friends, is the first step to freedom, to eternal life. The kingdom of heaven is within us, meaning that when we can really fully get away from these patterns, go inside and be still, and know God, so to speak, we can, through stillness, being still, being free of these bondages to these patterns, we can tap a state of peace that, that passes all understanding. We can even describe it. And that's my hope for all of us. We use the Enneagram as a tool to free us for, bringing us massive fulfillment and massive freedom by non-judgmentally observing ourselves and doing the work of self-inquiry, of, asking myself, okay, I keep tending to avoid conflict. I keep tending to not have difficult conversations that I need to have. Why is that? What happened that made me want to act like that? Is that pattern still serving me? Is how much, it's costing me this much of, it's bringing me this comfort, this illusory comfort of like, okay, well, I'm going along with the flow, and so I'm not having to deal with conflict. So there's like this like normal like level of peace that comes with that, because you don't have to face it. But if I face it, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable, but would that lead to a more fulfillment and more deeper peace in the long term? And so by becoming more inquisitive about the pattern, questioning the pattern, seeing if it's valid or not, seeing if it's serving you or not, you can become more free over time. And again, like I said, this is a journey. This is not like, all right, let's make 5 or 6 videos, and then after the 6th video, we're free, guys, forever. No, like it's a journey. It's a lifelong progress. But the sooner, whenever you start a journey, whenever it's time for you to start a journey, the better it is. So my hope is that we start this journey together, and we'll continue it together for many weeks to come and time to come. But freedom can happen and come in an instant. When we remove all the obstacles to peace that are blocking us from experiencing that kingdom of heaven within us, it'll come. It'll come like a thief in the night. Like quietly, it'll sneak up on you, and then boom, one day you wake up and you're like, man, I'm so much freer than I was 5 years ago. I'm a completely different person, or even 6 months ago. And that's the joy of a path like this. And it's a path that it's a joy that I want all of us to experience. So thank you guys for watching this video. The Enneagram, I had one last point I was going to mention. Does the Enneagram help you advance spiritually? Yes, it absolutely does. Because, you know, Enneagram by no means claims to be an end path. Like it's not, it's just a beginning. It helps you begin a journey. But the journey doesn't stop with the Enneagram. And the journey has to ultimately lead into a spiritual path of your higher self's choosing. No, I was going to say your choosing, but I think our higher self chooses a path for us when we are receptive and open and clear-minded. So it can help you advance spiritually because it can help you become aware of the tactics that your ego, your personality type tends to play. And the ego is so sneaky, it can take a hold of a spiritual truth and use it as like a what they call spiritual bypassing. It's like use a spirit, like they just put a spiritual label on something. It's, they use a spiritual truth to not face certain realities, to not change, because spiritually waking up requires you to change. It's, you know, waking up from a sleep implies that you are changing. You were in a sleep state, now you are changing into into an awake state, and there's a change there. So there, waking up requires us to change. But with the Enneagram, that spiritual journey can become a lot shorter and a lot less painful and a lot more accurate, I would say, because you might be on a spiritual path for 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years, and then realize, man, like my ego really took a hold of that path for a decent amount of the time that I was on that path. And it made me feel like I'm awake. It made me feel woke, but I was not woke. I was a joke. I was kidding myself. I was kidding myself and I was not, you know, truly awake. And that certainly happened to me. I used to think I'm so woke. I used to think I'm so free of my patterns. And then I learned Enneagram. I, you know, was put in certain situations because life, and I think, you know, I believe God loves testing us, not to punish us, but to help us become more free. Because as long as we don't know we're in a prison, we can't free ourselves from it. And I think that's something that one of the founders, one of the pioneers of the Enneagram field, which his name is Gurdjieff, was Gurdjieff, he talked about how, like, in order to free yourself from the prison, you have to know the prison or something like that. Or this might be an original quote from me. You never know. Just kidding. But I think it's Gurdjieff saying that, and it's so true. The Enneagram helps us identify the prison that we're in so that we can free ourselves from it in a shorter amount of time. It's kind of like, it always reminds me of, if you've ever seen the movie, or sorry, the TV show Prison Break. Michael had the whole prison map tattooed on his body. So without the prison map, his escape from the prison would have taken so much longer. Because if he didn't have the prison map, he might have, like, you know, made a hole in the wall, made a little tunnel in the wall, and that tunnel might have led him straight into the officer's office. You know, so what he needed to have a map first and foremost so that he can shorten the time of his escape and ultimately freedom from that prison that he was in. So my hope for all of us is that we make that prison break from our personalities patterns, and this is going to be even more exciting than any episode of Prison Break. I guarantee you, this journey of self-discovery and self-growth and, you know, freeing ourselves and waking ourselves up is going to be more fulfilling than any Netflix show binge we go on. So my friends, I'll be back in future videos. We'll talk about the types more specifically, and we talk about how spiritually we can use the Enneagram to tap more into our authentic, essential higher self, our eternal self, so to speak. So I love you. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for even paying attention this long to this video. I hope to see you in future videos. And again, my name is PJ, and I'll be back with more Enneagram content.